Good morning. I am Eric Fish, the Chief Legal Officer of the FSMB. It is my pleasure to moderate this panel and the next on artificial intelligence. In 1932, Einstein cautioned that advances in technology could have made human life carefree if the organizing powers of man could have kept step with these technological advances. But instead, he noted that these advances are now as dangerous as a razor in the hands of a 3-year-old. We are now at one of those critical moments where we must think of those sort of questions as we look at how artificial intelligence will transform healthcare. Are we going to regulate it and keep pace with it, or is it going to be as dangerous as a scalpel in the hands of a 3-year-old? We will begin this session with a presentation from Dr. Anthony Chang, who is the Chief Intelligence and Innovation Officer for the Children's Hospital of Orange County. Although he was already an accomplished pediatric cardiologist, Dr. Chang had the foresight to think about artificial intelligence and how it's going to revolutionize healthcare. He went back to school and completed his Master's of Science in Data Science with a subspecialization in artificial intelligence from the Stanford School of Medicine. He has since emerged as a leading voice on AI in healthcare and lectures widely on big data and the use of artificial intelligence in medicine. He is the founder and medical director of the Medical Intelligence and Innovation Institute, M3I or MI3, is it? MI3, at Children's Hospital of Orange County. It's a first of a kind of its hospital, and the Institute is dedicated to implementing data science in AI in medicine. He's also the founder of the AI Med program, which as I've looked at it as the Manhattan Project for AI in healthcare, bringing together some of the brightest minds to look at these big picture questions and hopefully coming up with answers. He noted in an interview that it's nice to work on these issues on the Pacific Coast because you can look out at the water and kind of think abstractly. While we don't have water here, I hope you've got vast amount of Texas grasslands to have that similar conversation of what's out there. You will be receiving what I'd say is a crash course in AI right now, and Dr. Chang will address what is happening in AI, how boards can stay up to date on this rapidly changing technology, and what it means for the regulatory board and our regulatory professions. With that, I welcome Dr. Chang.
Thank you, Eric. Been accommodating the world that's so excited about AI and particularly medicine right now. This is a pit stop between 2 trips to Europe and Asia. So it's good to be in Texas, although I grew up as a Redskins fan, so it was a little bit foreign to me to see all the stars around here. But so it's good to be here. I was just reflecting over dinner with Hamayan, Scott, and Eric last night that I had a pretty busy year last year. I think I gave close to 200 talks. And the meeting last year with the SFMB really stood out as one of the most engaged and enthusiastic audiences. So I can only say that a few times throughout the year, but it was clearly stood out. And thank you for what you do, because it's so important, especially in this new age of medicine that I'll share with you. It's so important that you're engaged, educated, and enlightened and involved. So I sort of added the word primer after the title that I was asked to speak about, because I do think, while it's important to talk about all the regulatory issues, I think the first thing and the most important thing is probably to try to understand the basics of artificial intelligence. And for the questions that you don't get to ask, I can now say it's going to be in the book. The book was complete. It's essentially a book that's, I think, pretty readable for everybody. I know we have a mixed audience here. This is written for clinicians and data scientists and everyone else that's interested in the topic. So the book is called Intelligence-Based Medicine. It'll be out in a few months. So, and then I'm sort of interesting to say that as much as I did a lot of research on regulatory issues, there was just not a lot written that was substantive on regulating artificial intelligence in medicine. So I could have made this a very short talk, so I'm going to instead focus on the basics of AI as relevant to medicine, so that perhaps the discussion on regulation will make a little bit more sense. So for those of you who think, I'm just going to go to retirement and not worry about this AI stuff, some of my senior clinician colleagues had this attitude, just eke out a few more years, they don't have to deal with this whole new big change in artificial intelligence. And obviously, I don't think that's the right attitude, because no matter what you do, it's going to be part of what you do in the future. But no worries, it's not going to replace those of you who are dealing with regulatory issues, because I think even robots don't want that job. It's too complicated. So you have job security. No worries. Okay. So just a quick primer on AI in medicine. And again, I'm distilling into some slides in about 30 minutes, a textbook basically. So I'm just going to focus on the very important basic aspects. So why artificial intelligence in 2019? Why is this so important for medicine right now? Well, we're lucky that this is a once-in-a-generation potential to transform medicine. And it's because of three main reasons. One, the sophistication of the algorithms have gotten to the point of a new milestone, and particularly with Jeff Hinton's work in Toronto and others, really changed the ballgame in terms of artificial intelligence. And particularly with something called ImageNet, which is being able for the software to be able, or artificial intelligence to be able to basically label pictures on their own, which has never happened before. The second of the triad of important developments is storage. So as you know, cloud computing has totally changed the game of dealing with artificial intelligence as well. And the third part of this, thanks to the gaming industry, is GPU. GPU, for those of you who are not familiar with this, is the graphic processing unit that is in all the games, especially the real-time strategy games that your teenagers or your friends play. That has totally changed the velocity of processing for software. So those three things combined sort of is the perfect recipe for advancing AI at an unprecedented speed. And lastly, in healthcare, we have now more data than we've ever had before, and particularly imaging data. So if you think about medical and healthcare data, 80 to 90% of the healthcare data was synthesized in the last 5 years. So all of this combined yields an amazing opportunity for all of us. So just a few words about types of AI. So we're really now at the right time, because we still have really, really good AI methodologies, but it's still considered narrow or weak AI. And by that I mean the AI, as good as it is only very good for very specific tasks. So you probably heard about medical image interpretation with computer vision. That's really now superior to not just a single radiologist, but groups of radiologists. So we're sort of at the point where we're close to the AI surpassing human cognition in terms of performance. So right now, the current state, we're in narrow AI, but in the future, we're heading into what I consider general or strong AI. So by that I mean the AI is going to be able to start thinking like a human being for the first time. And according to all the experts that I know, the median year that this is going to arrive is probably going to be in a decade or so. So in another 10 years or so, the computers are going to have cognitive ability very similar to clinicians in general. There's also a lot of confusion about the different types of AI in terms of what I call the 3 A's, assisted, augmented, and autonomous. So just wanted to clarify, and it's really not too complicated. Assisted AI, think about the iRoomba vacuum cleaner that you may have at your house. So it's sort of self-programmed, it's moving around, it doesn't need your supervision, and there's really little or no human involvement. A lot of industrial robots are getting to that point. If you ever because of my interest in AI, I have opportunities to visit big companies and their robotic operation. It is quite amazing how many things are being automated right now. An example in healthcare would be something like the robots that do blood work at Copenhagen Hospital. You literally just send the blood sample in, and the robots does everything from analyzing the blood and even including sending the results to the electronic record. So essentially the entire process is automated now. Now, augmented intelligence is really sort of the hot area right now. So where humans and machines are really working together to improve performance of any task. So there's a lot of business analytics. You may know that Wall Street is essentially all run by augmented intelligence with very little human supervision needed. In medicine, I think one example would be the Watson for Oncology, which has, I know it's had mixed reviews, but that's a form of augmented intelligence. And if you're from a hospital or healthcare system that has data scientists, that's augmented intelligence as well. So it's basically clinicians working with data scientists in coming up with decision support tools or medical image interpretation. Now, the category that perhaps intimidates some people is the autonomous intelligence category. So, and that's exemplified by the autonomous driven vehicle. I have a Tesla. Even though I'm an AI advocate, I do have trouble letting go of the steering wheel and the brake at the same time. So we had this dinner conversation last night. So how many people here, by show of hands, would be willing to sit in a car that's autonomously driven? Okay. How about a plane that's autonomously flown? So more people will fly an autonomous flying plane? Okay, that's interesting. This is an interesting group. How about an MRI that's entirely read by computer vision with no human radiologists? Okay, so I was not quite correct last night. Okay, this is an interesting group for sure. Okay, so maybe that's why you're in regulation. Okay, so autonomous intelligence is, as the name implies, there's little or no human involvement needed. Sort of like assisted, except now the software or the machine is much smarter than the assisted type of intelligence. And a good example, they're actually, contrary to what you may or may not know, they're actually autonomous intelligent medical devices already. Most people don't know that. There's like about a dozen that's basically learning on its own, functioning on its own with high performance, with no human supervision needed. And one well-known one is something called IDXDR, which analyzes retinal images for diabetic retinopathy. So that's already being done. Imagine, I have a global health interest as well. Imagine the impact on global health to have a software that's able to diagnose diabetic retinopathy. It's a game changer. So that's already out there. It's learning on its own. It's going to be probably better, if it not already, than any group of ophthalmologists that you can assemble. So that's where we are now. So as you can see, based on what I described, I'm going to borrow Bill Gibson, who's a computer scientist, famous saying, the future's already here, it's just not evenly distributed. So I travel all over the world, and it's amazing how different regions are in terms of artificial intelligence. So we've been fortunate to have evidence-based medicine, but to go to the next level, our patient population and as well as us, we expect precision medicine, but at the same time, we want population health. So that's a tremendous expectation that's going to require a huge increase in information and knowledge that we're not meeting right now with evidence-based medicine and our electronic record as it stands now. So what I propose is that we think about a totally different paradigm of medicine called intelligence-based medicine, which is based on data and artificial intelligence. I think that done correctly will get us to where we need to go in the next decades. And that's just the graphic showing you the reason why I think it's so exciting to think about precision medicine and population health, because we're going to have different silos of data coming together, imaging, genomics, now wearable technology is taken off. All of that hopefully will be organized into planes of information and data that can be assembled and artificial intelligence enabled. So what's the definition of artificial intelligence? Come back to basics for a minute. The best definition is probably the first one that Marvin Minsky, who was a computer scientist at MIT, has said, which is the science of making machines that do things that would require intelligence if done by, I'm going to substitute instead of men, I'm going to say humans. So it's basically, that's why the assisted intelligent vacuum cleaner fits this category, because it does take some intelligence to be able to vacuum the room. So just a little cartoon for a break here. You're not being replaced by a robot, you're being replaced by someone who understands robots. Now, I've been putting this cartoon up here and there for the last 5 to 10 years, and it is actually happening. So in some radiology programs, they're actually looking for radiologists that have a computer vision background. So in a way, if you don't understand AI or not part of the adoption process, I think it's possible that you're just rendered less relevant, particularly in medicine. So what does artificial intelligence actually do? So if you look at the doctor's or the nurse's brain, or the pharmacist's brain, because there's pharmacists here as well, there are a lot of things you do day to day. So the image recognition, it can be done by computer vision now with something called deep learning or convolutional neural network. Natural language processing, when you talk to patients, that's now a branch of artificial intelligence so that computers can understand what humans are talking about and what written language is about. So you probably remember IBM Watson building human contestants in 2011. A major part of that software was focused on natural language processing. Understanding the nuances of what we say and write is so critical for AI. And then lastly, machine learning and decision support. Different parts of our brain do that well also, and that's now being also taken on by computers. So if you just look at the brain graphic and the parts that are sort of symbolized by the machine-like highlighting, that's sort of roughly the percentage of the medical domain that computers can do right now. So it's about 10 or 20% of what doctors do day to day can be done better often by machine intelligence. So people often ask me, well, what is the difference between machine and deep learning, and how is it different than artificial intelligence? And yet people talk about data science all the time. So this is my best attempt at trying to diagram out the different areas. So deep learning, which is the really, really robust part of artificial intelligence right now, is under the umbrella of machine learning. So it's a very, very sophisticated way of doing machine learning. And machine learning is in the domain of artificial intelligence, which usually sits in computer science departments around universities. And then data science is a sort of a new branch of all of this by focusing on analytics as well as deep learning. So there's, as you can see, there's even mathematics and statisticians involved in all of this. So artificial intelligence, in essence, is a sort of a conglomeration of all of these disciplines together. So a few years from now, when we talk about artificial intelligence, basically it's going to be a convergence of all these three areas of computer science, data science, and mathematics. So on my data science team, for instance, my lead data scientist is actually a mathematician with a very strong statistical background and with an interest in deep learning. So all these three areas are converging. So we mentioned machine learning. So machine learning is divided into two different kinds. So supervised learning, as the name implies, is when humans are involved in labeling different medical images or making decisions so that the computer learns from you what the rules are and then apply it to data. So this is used in medical images as well as decision support right now. The really, really exciting part of machine learning is what I call unsupervised learning. So you just sort of feed the data into the computer, and the computer is going to give you patterns that it recognizes. For instance, we all know there are two types of diabetes right now, type 1 and type 2, and that hasn't changed in probably close to 100 years. So why hasn't anything changed? Well, things are going to change because with unsupervised learning, and this is already data that's being reported now, there are actually probably hundreds of subtypes of diabetes that we just haven't recognized in the past because we haven't had this amount of data, nor this robust an AI that's available. So yes, in a way, our lives are going to get far more complicated as clinicians because you're going to be, can you imagine, in the near future, a patient's going to come in and the classification of diabetes is going to be, type 3A-B, but it's so much better for patients to have that kind of classification. Just to give you sort of a real-life example of how potent this resource can be, this is a study that I was indirectly involved in. This is trying to diagnose autism in children. And as you know, the delay in diagnosis of autism is 6 to 12 months. So by the time a child gets therapy for autism, it's often after a whole year of behavior that's consistent with autism. So this is a crowdsourced machine learning tool that you can actually use by videotaping your child that you may think that he or she has autism, and it's uploaded into the cloud, and it's analyzed by computer vision, and then the crowd actually also contributes their input, and it's machine learned so that you can actually come up with an autism diagnosis in a matter of days, not months and years. So this totally changes the game in terms of being able to come to a timely diagnosis and therapy as well. So I talked about machine learning, which has been around since the 1980s. So the excitement about AI is mainly rooted in deep learning that's been around since about 2000. And the reason is that it's just a much more robust, faster, more accurate type of learning that is well designed to take on all the nuances and challenges of clinical medicine. Perhaps not regulation of clinical medicine, but clinical medicine. Medicine is very, very complicated. So deep learning is really going to be able to take a lot of that on. The advantages is that it's extremely accurate. The disadvantage is that it needs a lot of data and a lot of expertise to run. So it's sort of like machine learning on massive amount of steroids. And the three different types of learning, along with deep learning, including deep learning, I should say, that will revolutionize how we look at medicine are the following. So I talked about deep learning. It's particularly good for extracting information from electronic records. Now, we spent all this expense as well as taken on this burden of electronic records, but the clinicians will usually tell you what's the benefit of all that extra work and money. Well, finally, we're going to be able to benefit from that because it's essentially the substrate or the thing that we can really mine information from. Transfer learning is basically taking one learning and putting it onto another database. So that's going to be very helpful in the future. And reinforcement learning is where a lot of excitement is about in medicine, which is the smartest AI that we have now is reinforcement learning. It's starting to think like a human being in terms of capability. So reinforcement learning is the AI that's starting to think like a human being. Transfer learning is going to be very important to transfer proven models from one disease category to another. And deep learning is just going to be the workhorse of AI in the future for medicine. So this is a graphic on deep reinforcement learning. I'm sorry about transitioning from practically no graphics from the previous talk to now a massive amount of graphics, but hope you're getting used to it. But deep reinforcement learning is exciting because it's what the AI methodology that was involved in beating the human champion in the game Go. So how many people here actually know about this event or the game Go in general? Okay, so let me pause here and explain. So the game Go, I played it as a child, and I lived in Asia part of the time. So it's an ancient game that involves white and black stones, and you basically conquer territory as you play along. It sounds very simplistic, but it's the most complicated game that humans play. So 2 years ago, people thought it would be another decade or so before AI can really take on the human champion and defeat the human champion. So people thought, okay, Jeopardy was not too hard, so not surprisingly, AI was able to defeat the human champions, handily, I might say. But they thought it was another decade before Go can be conquered, and within a year and a half, the DeepMind group out of Google was able to defeat the human champion, and 4 games to 1. So that's when everyone sort of rethought about the progress of AI and the excitement sort of that ensued. So deep reinforcement learning, if you think about applying that level of AI to clinical medicine, is going to be tremendously rewarding in the future. I publicly said, well, medicine's not really like the game Go, because you don't have, a lot of times, because I spent most of my time in the intensive care unit, a lot of time you don't have a lot of time to think about your next move, and at the same time you're dealing with sometimes 20 or 30 other patients. So I said something like, I'll be impressed when AI can take on the real-time strategy games that your teenagers play. Then I'll be impressed. And of course, 6 months later, DeepMind announced that they were able to beat some human champions in real-time strategy games. Now, for those of you who are familiar with that, you know that's an amazing feat, because it's basically now thinking like a human and defeating human champions. So I think we're really at a point where this is, again, an amazing resource that we just have to be able to learn from and be able to regulate for the benefit of our patients. This is just a quick graphic on something I mentioned earlier, which is a special kind of deep learning, and it's called convolutional neural network, or CNN. So if you can't remember anything, just remember CNN is a television station, obviously. It deals with images, so you can impress your friends back home and just say, oh, I learned about CNN today, but not the kind that you're thinking about with Will Blitzer. This is just an automated way of interpreting medical images at the highest level. So you're probably used to hearing about computer-aided diagnostics that were around for a couple of decades earlier, but this is a much more accurate, much faster, much more robust way of looking at medical images. So I think within this decade, coming decade, it would be very unusual for any radiologist, pathologist, cardiologist, dermatologist, ophthalmologist to be interpreting medical images without the aid of some aspect of deep learning. I'm working on a project looking at echocardiograms applying this methodology. So, and the progress of CNNs has been exponential. So within a decade, easily within a decade, you will not meet image-focused clinicians reading images entirely on their own, unless they really want to. One of the radiologists I talked to said, oh, this is great, but I like reading easy images because that's when I kind of take a mental break, you know. So if the humans still want to take a break, you can, but the computer vision is going to be powerful enough now to really help the human clinicians, not replace human clinicians, which is a question I get very often, but simply help out the human clinician as a very able partner in looking at medical images. And the same will come for decision support probably in another 5 to 10 years as well. So now every human in this audience can easily figure out this is alternating pictures of chihuahuas with blueberry muffins, right? Didn't take you long. For some reason, this is always an Achilles heel for deep learning. The computers still can't quite figure out which is which. So, and it's the accuracy in terms of performance is about 65 to 70%, disappointingly. And I think if you think about computer vision, it's looking at two-dimensional, flat images. It can't relate this into three-dimensional space, which humans, even children, are amazingly adept in doing. So that's an aspect of computer vision that is being corrected now. So in the next few years, you will see deep learning taking on sort of the three-dimensional relational aspects of images that it hasn't been able to do before. So I wanted to see how accurate humans can do, particularly human child. So I asked my daughter, who was 4.5 at the time, to look at these images and tell me which is which, after a brief explanation of what this is. And she was 7 for 7. So a 4-year-old can beat out computer vision right as of now. And I think there's something to be learned about how children learn. And last night at dinner, we talked about the next phase of AI is going to be learning how a human child learns and applying those principles onto what computers are able to do now. And that's, I think, when we really see a further escalation of AI capability. So ironically, machines are going to be learning from children and how children learn. Because remember, when we were children, we didn't learn everything from looking at thousands of images. We looked at a few, we learned, and then we sort of found out what a car should be looking like. We didn't have thousands or even millions of images to look at. So this is, as you can see, I'm teaching my daughter Emma how to play the game Go as a 4-year-old. And she was smiling because she was excited. This is a new game for her. She stopped smiling after the 13th move because she realized that it's very, very difficult. So, and then she asked me for a Chihuahua. So she ended up getting blueberry muffin on Sunday morning. So yeah, please don't miss the AI boat. It's the real deal this time. And I know, looking around the audience, some of you may have heard about AI in the 70s and the 80s. This is a much different time for AI. I'm pretty sure this is the real deal this time. I know people got fooled the last 2 times. All right, just a few words about cognitive computing, or IBM Watson, because one of the most often asked questions I get is, so where does IBM Watson fit in all of this deep learning stuff? Well, IBM Watson is a branch of AI called cognitive computing. So as the name implies, it's trying to mimic the human brain. So it's an assemblage of the techniques that we talked about. So it includes machine learning, includes deep learning even, and includes natural language processing. So essentially mimicking the human brain. So it is still considered part of artificial intelligence because it's just, assembling different types of methodologies. And if you're a real nerd and you're interested, this is sort of the roadmap of Watson. It's basically extremely powerful search algorithm with natural language processing with some machine learning built in. So essentially, even though Watson had some negative publicity in the last few years, I do think that's the future of artificial intelligence in medicine, is that we're going to be assembling all of the amazing tools to try to mimic what a human brain does. And one of the most amazing things about what I've learned in artificial intelligence is just how impressive the human brain is, running on very low energy, and it can do, even a fatigued clinician can perform in some ways much better than any artificial intelligence can. I mentioned our natural language processing a few times, or NLP. So NLP, again, is how the computer can process, understand, and generate language that humans can understand. So it's much more than a dictation system. It does include things like chatbots that you hear about avatars, about Alexa, for instance, is run on a very powerful natural language processing tool. I gave a talk in China last year and was simultaneously translated into Chinese from my English. So it's very, very impressive right now. And it will continue to be impressive. And we really need this tool in medicine because all the doctors and nurses' notes, for instance, are really unstructured and really needs to be understood by computers. So where do I see AI adoption in terms of issues? So this is a small part of the table that I assembled in the book about all the potential issues with artificial intelligence and adoption in medicine. So the 4 main categories are data. There are a lot of issues with data. Technology, and I'll talk about the black box perception in a few minutes. There's lack of education, And you see also, by the way, regulation is one of the things I mentioned about AI adoption obstacles. And then there are many others. So the bad news is that we have a lot of issues we have to contend with. The good news is that I don't think any one of these is a deal breaker for AI adoption. We just have to be patient and come up with solutions. So the good thing about humans over machines is that we're creative in coming up with solutions to deal with problems. And machines are not that clever yet. So the common saying, as you may have heard, is that computers or machines are fast but stupid, and human beings are slow but very smart. So why not combine the two and come up with solutions? So that's sort of the recurrent theme for AI in medicine, combining human and machine. There's a lot of discussion about explainability or the black box perception, and probably your clinicians in your states are going to say, I don't understand it, I don't want to deal with it, I don't trust it. So it's sort of the usual language that I hear when clinicians that are in the negative camp talk about artificial intelligence. Well, I think it's not actually explainability. I think it's actually interpretability that we need to talk about. What do I mean and what's the difference? Well, explainability is essentially you understand all the nuances of a particular technological methodology. So that means you understand the code, you understand the algorithm, you understand all the nuances of artificial intelligence. I think what clinicians really do need and perhaps can accommodate is interpretability. I don't think they need to understand all the nuances of algorithms. I think they do need to trust it, though. And I'll give you an example. I'm a cardiologist and I still practice, and I have patients with a pacemaker. I don't understand all the engineering aspects of a pacemaker per se, but I do trust it in terms of the fact that I can program it any way I like to, and I can trust it, and I can pick up trouble based on my testing the pacemaker. And I think perhaps instead of saying this is all a black box and we can't explain it, we can work on a solution from both sides. I think the clinicians hopefully will trust it if they understand the basics, but perhaps not all the nuances of data science and artificial intelligence. On the other hand, I think data scientists need to make it a little bit simpler to understand and perhaps meet in the middle. So I think this is a solvable problem right now that we see in artificial intelligence adoption in biomedicine, is this sort of black box perception that clinicians have. Lastly, I think humans have always admired birds in flight. We're at I think literally the Wright brothers stage of artificial intelligence adoption in medicine. And I think eventually we'll get to this place where we can fly farther and faster than any bird that we've seen. So I think we just need to be patient. And as the famous saying says, we always overestimate the dividends from technology in the short term, and I think we're doing that now. And at the same time, we're underestimating what it can do in the future, i.e. 10 years or more. I do think we're underestimating the capability of AI even now for the next 10 or 20 years. As you may or may not remember, 25 years ago, there was no GPS to give us our guidance system in a car. And we used to have a collection of maps to drive across the country. And that was only 25 years ago. So I think we do and expect to see tremendous progress with artificial intelligence in medicine. What's to come in the future? Well, as you probably have seen already, the reason why AI really needs to take off is because of all the wearable technology that's going to input a lot of data. And unless we have AI embedded into those devices, we're just not going to accommodate. Despite wearing these wearable technologies, we're not going to be able to benefit from that. So where are we with AI in medicine? Are we at the irrational hype stage, or are we at the paradigm shift stage? So this is the Gartner hype cycle. I promise you I wasn't going to show it, but I broke my promise. But I just want to illustrate that we are at this point. So there's still a little too much hype, although I'm starting to feel like we're kind of pumping on the brakes now. We're lowering the expectation, which is the right thing to do. I think we are going to have a nadir period where we just are going to be impatient, but if we ride out the cycle, we're going to really benefit in the long term and really make a huge difference in medicine and healthcare that's so in dire need of some solutions to the perennial problems that we face. So the regulatory strategies for AI in medicine, just a few, I think, discussion points rather than solutions. As you know, there's very little written actually on regulation in artificial intelligence in medicine. And a few articles that I have been able to pull together really say very little. There's very little substance. But let's just focus on who the stakeholders are. So as you know, FDA is in the middle of all this. Indirectly, they've been working with the AMA. They've been privileged to serve on the committee. And I think they really deserve a lot of kudos for changing their stance and strategy in looking at AI in medicine. And I think it's very forward-thinking. So I think they have, I'll go over that in a few minutes. The regulation is going to come from boards as well as the medical legal arena to deal with all of these issues as they come up. Hopefully, as you're demonstrating here, very cohesively with a single voice rather than fragmentation of opinions. There's going to be a lot of regulation that centers around data privacy and compliance, and as Europe and California are dealing with data privacy, I think that's going to come to every state. And lastly, just business practice of AI companies in healthcare to have standards of business and integrity there. So there are multiple, I think, regulatory bodies that will be involved. It's a good thing in terms of having a multidisciplinary involvement. It's not as good when you talk about so many different voices involved and without a single voice. So what are sort of strategical solutions? I think right now we're at the human versus machine stage of regulation. So this is a really valiant attempt by the FDA to come up with some solutions, or at least partial solutions, partial temporary solutions to be accurate, how to deal with the increase in AI tools that are available in biomedicine. So this is the approach where perhaps we should look at the entire workflow of artificial intelligence in medicine rather than treat it as a device. I'm going to get into a little trouble saying this, but I think it's not correct or not strategic to call this, software as a device concept, as a medical device. I think that immediately puts people who are not well versed in AI into the medical device mindset, which I think is perhaps outdated and not going to be good for the future. But I really do applaud the FDA for thinking about software as a work cycle, a product cycle, rather than something that's going to be here, and then 18 months later there's a 2.0 version. That's not what AI is. And I've even said, I think Eric reminded me, we need to totally just reboot the entire regulatory process for AI. And perhaps 5 to 10 years from now, we'll realize that if we reboot the way we look at regulation for AI, it actually is also very good for everything else as well, particularly medical devices. So this is, again, a very sophisticated way of looking at AI and machine learning for medical devices with some modifications. So they just, in my mind, I really admired FDA for taking this on, and it's not easy to take this on. I think for the future, I think we ought to have two different ways of looking at this. So I talked about the FDA and the human versus machine way of looking at regulating medical intelligence. So I think I remembered the words of Alan Turing, and you may or may not know him, but at least the story of Alan Turing in solving the Enigma machine during the Second World War was in the movie The Imitation Game. How many people have seen that movie? Okay, so you're familiar with that. So remember the line that he says, well, in his mind, it has to be a machine against a machine, right? So why are all these brilliant mathematical minds trying to decipher the Enigma machine when really a machine ought to be pitted against the machine, and he's still correct, I think, after 70 years or so. I think we need to get machines involved in regulation. It cannot be an entire human process to regulate machines, basically. So, and better yet, perhaps we can think about human and machine regulating artificial intelligence in medicine. And this is a picture taken about a year ago from a meeting that I was privileged to co-chair. Was the first ever datathon in medicine. So 100 clinicians and 100 data scientists paired up to solve research problems in clinical medicine. So this is, I think, one of the best demonstrations how powerful human and machine coming together can solve enigmas in medicine, and also including regulatory issues. So again, human intelligence and machine intelligence coming together for a better medical intelligence in general. So if we look at regulatory need and time, so right now, regulation is just not going to get us there. So this is a similar graph that I showed earlier. I think with machine intelligence and humans involved, perhaps this gap between AI and regulatory issues or regulatory measures can be met finally in this decade. So with that, if you're interested in artificial intelligence, I have, with the help of a generous grant from the foundation and the institute, there's an ebook that's available before the real book comes out. We have a monthly or bi-monthly magazine that you can read. All the talks from previous meetings called Artificial Intelligence in Medicine are uploaded, including talks on regulatory issues. And that's the URL for the website. And for those of you, that's my contact information, including my cell phone, by the way, if you want to text me. I don't get an overabundance of calls or texts, so don't worry. And this is our big, sort of the Olympics of AI in medicine meetings. This is the big meeting every year. We have 500 plus people come, including about 30-40% clinicians, and people in regulatory as well. So I'm going to invite Eric to come this December. It's going to be December 11th to the 14th, 2019 in Southern California at the Ritz-Carlton in Laguna Niguel. So it's kind of like the 3.5-day version of the talk I just gave, but a lot of practical, I think, applications and questions, and a really exciting meeting. And I always thank my donor, who happens to be Walt Disney's granddaughter, that supported my vision of trying to get artificial intelligence to transform medicine, as well as my very patient mentors, TAs, and classmates from Stanford School of Medicine. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Chang, and thank you for that invitation to go out to California. I'll have to approve that with my bosses, both in the room and the one back home that actually controls my schedule, which is my wife. But I think I can get her to abide by this. And it's interesting. You guys are all in California, and your talk about how AI is learning from children reminds me of a Beach Boys song, which is "The child is the father of the man." And I think that's really apropos, watching my own children grow, but also watching this field grow. We will now open it up for questions that you may have of Dr. Chang, so please use the microphones as before. As you kind of distill what's going on on his screen, I'll ask you this question, and maybe you can extrapolate a little bit more for us. The economic drivers of AI and healthcare are really something that is at the forefront of a lot of people's minds. I think AI is often thought of as something that's going to be like McDonald's. It's going to be bigger, faster, stronger type of thing, but in a way it's also cheaper, easier, and adequate in the clinical setting. What sort of things are you seeing drive the development and deployment in AI, but also the hype and maybe some of the overstatement of its abilities?
I think it's a very broad question, but I see clinicians and administrators and investors coming up with really innovative ways of applying artificial intelligence. So I talked about medical image interpretation. There are companies involved in getting deep learning involved and helping the radiologist, but not always in areas that you think are obvious. So medical image interpretation is key, but I think a lot of these companies realize that you have to apply AI to the entire continuum of the radiologist workflow. So going from acquiring the image to workflow to prioritizing which image to read to helping the image to be read. So I see as a broad theme, the approach is actually more than just one specific task, but taking on a whole continuum or a collection of tasks in generating the business model that you need for artificial intelligence in medicine. So the short answer is, I think you have to help the clinicians and the hospitals work with a lot of workflow issues and not just the decision support and medical image interpretation that you hear a lot about in the journals.
Now, one of the things you mentioned was the importance of natural language processing in both the deployment and use, but also the development of AI. And as a shout out to my friends from North Carolina, I am married to a North Carolina girl, and I will say the term "bless your heart." You guys know what that means. Would a machine be able to figure out the cultural nuance of "bless your heart," especially as a cardiologist? Does it mean you have a bad heart? Are you overly religious, or are you really trying to say something else? Are we able to get to that point?
Yeah, we're already there. I mean, I think as Watson demonstrated on Jeopardy, I mean, yes, occasionally it has a gaffe, it's comical, but, we're a little, I don't mean to be a defender of machines and artificial intelligence, but we're a little bit unfair sometimes to the machines. Human beings sometimes don't understand. If you have someone from a broad comment, they may not know what that means, and yet we're hard on the machines for not knowing something. So I think, in a way, we treat machines and artificial intelligence a little bit like we treat our children sometimes. I have 2 little girls. You expect them to be more perfect than you are when they grow up, and in fact, we should be a little bit more symmetric in terms of our expectations. Some of the AI tools get criticized because the performance accuracy is like 82% instead of 95%. And yet, if you get any group of clinicians together to look at any image, the accuracy is actually in 60-70% range, and yet we give the machines a hard time. So again, I think we just need to be a little bit fair, and I think I made the statement last year too, that we need to be a little bit fair to machines in terms of what they can do. They're really there to help us as much as they can, and see, I'm already talking to them like they're human beings, but these machines are really going to make our clinical lives a lot easier, I think, in the near future.
Looks like we have some questions, and I'll start from my left to right for these 3 questions, and I think that will give us up to the time.
So good morning, Dr. Chang, and thank you very much. My name is Sarv Turkanda. I'm a member of the Florida Board of Medicine and also on the Board of Directors for the Federation. So you mentioned a little bit about data and how important it is for these machines. The problem that I see with data sets right now, they're siloed by healthcare institutions, populations, demographics. And many of these healthcare institutions are now looking at this as IP and have some economic value. And that's one question, is where do we separate economic value from being private property versus institutional property? And number 2 is, how do you get rid of inherent biases if we don't combine all these data sets?
Well, the second question is a lot easier. The answer is you cannot avoid bias if you have even heterogeneous patient population within one institution. So we must have data from different institutions, not just here in the US even, but around the world. And that's one of the projects I work on, is trying to convince people they have to combine data from international centers, not just US centers. Coming back to the first question, which is the execution problem, and a philosophical one too, how do you convince people to share data? I think the patients have been very quiet in the discussion about data. True, I think institutions should benefit from the data because they curate it and they maintain it, but I think the gain share ought to be for institutions as well as for patients and even clinicians being the champions of that data. So I think if we can get around a more just loyalty to the institution, we need to be loyal to patients and the clinicians involved in terms of gain sharing from that data. So I think I think we're coming a little bit closer in the discussion about who owns the data and where this ought to be going. And I think patients are getting more vocal about insisting that they have a voice in terms of ownership, curation, and application of that data for artificial intelligence.
So I know in Europe right now, I believe that patients have to opt out of sharing their data. It's part of being in the healthcare system there. But in the United States, it's going to be very different.
Well, I think we'll get there, and I think Europe, China, and here are learning from each other in terms of what's working. California, as you know, is taking a similar stance as Europe, and I think suppose a lot of this is going to depend on the next administration as well in terms of where the data ownership is going to lie. But I think eventually we're going to come to a point where everyone's going to benefit from the healthcare data, not just the institutions or companies that are buying the data.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
To the middle question.
Thank you. Amba John Legata from the North Carolina Medical Board. Thank you for your presentation. It was very interesting. I think the biggest point that we took away is all of our children that are under the age of 10 are going to be way better at this than we are, and they already are showing us that they're way better than us. My focus, not only as a clinician and an administrator, is also as a teacher. I love the ability for the radiology example, because that's absolutely a cohesive, collaborative vision. Where I would like to see more information is in the teaching model for these next generation of physicians. And if you can speak to some of that, I know Stanford's doing some work. Harvard did some early work on that, published early this year. And what they found was that the residents just wanted less and less contact with their attendings, and they were happier, which again is more soft science. But the point of that being, there's going to be a move to, do I listen to my AI attending or do I listen to my physician attending, which is actually a question my 9-year-old asked me. Yeah. So thank you.
Great question. First, I'm very encouraged by what's happening in medical education. I was a little bit skeptical. Earlier this year, I was invited by the Council of Deans to state my position and recommendation for changing the medical education with not just AI, but emerging technologies in general. And I was expecting maybe a third of the room to push back on incorporating data science and artificial intelligence into the curriculum, but I was almost disappointed that there was no pushback at all. I think the discussion was more on how do we do this in a timely fashion? How do we accommodate the changes that are coming in the most efficient way without losing the core curriculum to a large extent? And I think I was very encouraged by that. I was very energized by that discussion. As a matter of fact, there was one medical school that even mandates that all of their MD candidates take on either computer engineering or data science as a dual degree program. And it's a school in Southern Illinois. I think another school is doing the same thing now. So while I think that's obviously at the extreme of incorporating data science into the medical school curriculum, I think it does raise the bar of expectation that everyone really should do some. Maybe not doing anything is not going to be fair to these students that will have a very different brand of medicine in the near future. I'm also, as my dinner colleagues know, collecting clinicians that have a current era data science background or education. There are preciously few right now, probably less than 200 internationally, but I think that's going to grow exponentially as the next few years go by. I'm already seeing a lot of young people thinking about getting this background as part of their medical education in the form of a separate master's, or at least a master's program. So I think that's exciting to me, because that means I think if we perhaps can convince 2, 5, 10% of clinicians, including nurses and pharmacists, to be interested in this area as a sub-area of discipline or specialization, I think we can really, really push the agenda much faster.
Dr. King, before I let you speak, I've got to acknowledge that there is a question that's come up from one of our internet viewers that I'd like to get to. If they've been sitting there on their computer, I hope I could at least give them their opportunity to speak before you do. The question is from Susan Spalding, and it is there a discussion or collaboration on how to include the public or patients in AI, or maybe the development of AI? Dr. Chang, you've seen these labs and you've been with the best and brightest here. Are there public or patient perspectives being expressed in those rooms?
There's some, but not enough. And that's why if you come to the AI Med meeting, I always open the meeting with a patient story, because I think we need to ground ourselves in how we can apply AI to help patients and make it patient-centric, rather than make it too academic or too theoretical, and it doesn't have any on-the-ground application benefit. So I do think it's important. I always, dovetailing the discussion on the data and patient issue, I think they ought to be also involved in the AI development as well as the data.
Dr. King.
Thank you. Susan Spalding's from Vermont also.
you Vermont people just like to ask questions.
We're everywhere. Thank you so much, Dr. Chang. I just had a question about adopting AI. And I've read, and I don't know if this is a feeling now in the field, that there may be greater uptake or earlier uptake in developing nations compared to more a Western nation such as the U.S., where there are really established medical systems, that developing nations may be more ready for a variety of reasons to adopt. And so I wondered if you would comment to that.
Yeah, I think that's whoever made that observation is very correct and consistent with what I'm seeing. So it's almost like in the U.S., I have friends at both Epic and Cerner, so I don't want to publicly say too many negative things, but it's really our albatross in a way, to have sort of state-of-the-art AI in terms of decision support. And I think there are countries that you would never expect to have pretty advanced AI, because they're not burdened by the existing electronic record infrastructure. And so they kind of leapfrog all of this right onto electronic health record that is very friendly for AI adoption. And one country that really stood out at a meeting last year in Europe was Estonia. Estonia just kind of leapfrogged all the obstacles and went right into an electronic system and data collection system that was well designed for AI. And I think it's possible, and it's possible in parts of China as well. So I think it's going to be more difficult in the US, even though we have an abundance of AI experts, abundance of resources in some ways, a lot of venture capital going in. We're always trying to neutralize some of the deficiencies of the existing electronic record system. And that's just with the decision support part. But I think on the wearable technology part, for those of you who are interested in that area, I think that's where I think AI can be sort of without a burden, because it's a virgin territory in terms of technology. So the AI can actually be relatively unencumbered by the electronic health system, a record system.
I've received notice that we're out of time, and Dr. Steingard, you're on the next panel, so I could ask you to hold your question. Dr. Chang is going to join us on that, and maybe we could foster that as a dialogue. We are now going to take a 15-minute break, and I thank Dr. Chang for his perspective. As I said, he will be joining us on our next panel, which is a regulatory reaction to AI in medicine. So thank you, Dr. Chang, and see you back in 15 minutes.